My parents worshipped my sister's career and mocked mine, until I bought her company, and fired her in front of everyone at Easter dinner. Easter dinner at my parents' place has always been a thing. Same dishes, same stories, same overcooked ham, and the same damn tension that clings to the walls like the smell of baked pineapple. Every year Beth, my older sister by 3 years and 100 inflated accomplishments, slides into her seat at the head of the table like she earned it. Like it's a throne. Like she didn't get that spot just because Mom always carved the turkey on that end and Beth always sat next to her soaking in approval like it was sunlight and she was a family plant. This year was no different, except that it was. I was back in town after closing the kind of deal that makes people Google your name. Quietly, of course. No interviews, no press photos, just a few lines on LinkedIn and a company-wide email sent at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. That's how I like it. That's how I operate, under the radar, over results. But Beth operates like a goddamn foghorn in a library. So, there we were. Mashed potatoes being passed, Mom already 2 scotches in, and Beth launching into her latest diatribe about how the tech industry is not for the weak. Something about hustle culture and emotional intelligence being overrated. I wasn't even listening at first. I was more focused on trying to cut the dry turkey breast without it crumbling into sawdust. But then she said it. Not everyone, she said, leaning back like a queen at court, can handle a real career in tech. She looked around the table like she expected applause, or at least a nod from Mom, and sure enough, Mom gave it, that quiet grunt of agreement she only uses when Beth's talking. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just took a slow sip of red wine while my brain filed that one away. I saw Grandpa Gene glance at me. He didn't say anything yet, but his eyes narrowed, and that's always the warning shot with him. Then came the next round of boasting. Beth talking about how she had to lay off a third of her team last month. Said it with a weird pride, like cutting people loose made her some kind of badass leader. She called it right-sizing. I called it, well, she laughed, said I probably wouldn't understand since I wasn't really in the trenches. I could see Dad shifting in his seat, trying to diffuse things before they turned into one of those passive, aggressive minefields that lasted all weekend. He asked her how the company was doing, and she started throwing out numbers, revenue projections, first quarter losses, investor pressure. All of it sounded impressive, unless you actually knew what it meant, which I did. I kept quiet, not because I was afraid to speak, but because I wanted to see how far she'd go. Digging her own grave before someone handed her a flashlight. That someone turned out to be Grandpa. Now, for context, Grandpa Gene is pushing 90 but still sharp enough to do his own taxes and destroy egos like he's playing whack-a-mole. He's always played a long game in this family. The patriarch, the observer, the one who remembers everything and forgets nothing. He waited until the moment Beth took a breath between fourth quarter pivot strategy and managing up the chain of command. Then he casually turned to me and asked the question that would flip the entire table dynamic on its smug little head. Is that why your company just bought hers, Aaron? I swear to God you could have heard a pin drop. Not just a pin, a dust particle, a breath, a heartbeat. Beth froze, fork halfway to her mouth. Mom stopped chewing mid-bite, which almost never happens unless someone dies or the power goes out. Dad stared at his wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. And me? I just kept chewing my roll like nothing happened, like he hadn't just lit a match in a room full of propane. Beth blinked once, twice, then chuckled. A little too loud. A little too fake. It wasn't like that, she said, voice rising half a note higher than usual. It was a merger, a strategic alignment of mutual interests. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. He said, the way only grandpas can when they know you're full of it but want to watch you squirm a bit longer. I didn't say a word, not yet, because when the truth is loaded and ready, you don't waste the first shot. You aim for impact. What Beth didn't know was that I'd spent the last 8 months watching her company circle the drain from a front row seat, and when the time was right, when the board was desperate, when the layoffs hit, when morale was scraping bottom, I made my move. Clean, legal, efficient. And now her name was on the org chart under mine. I didn't do it for revenge, but damn if it didn't taste like it. So, there we were. Easter dinner, my sister red-faced, my parents stunned, and my grandfather smiling like a cat who just knocked a vase off the table. There was no second act to that moment, just silence. Pure, uncomfortable, beautiful silence. Because sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the truth nobody saw coming. And as I reached for the gravy, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the first crack in the perfect little mirror my sister had built around herself. You ever notice how some families don't even bother hiding their favorite? Ours wasn't subtle about it. Beth was the golden child from the minute she popped out. I came 3 years later, quieter, squishier, more of an afterthought than a plan. Dad always said I was his surprise gift, but it felt more like I was the consolation prize for parents already too tired to give a second kid their full attention. Beth got the cheers, I got the checklists. Growing up, she got the best of everything before I even had a chance to know it was something I wanted. First bike? Shiny red, hand-picked from the nicest store in town. By the time I was big enough to ride, I got her old one, spray-painted blue, wheels already crooked. First car? A used but pristine Civic with a stereo loud enough to piss off the neighbors. Mine? Dad's old Taurus that smelled like feet and despair. When she screwed up, they called it ambition. When I did something right, it was either luck or background noise. I wasn't angry. Not then. Anger requires heat. And back then, all I had was cold resolve. A quiet kind of inventory that I started keeping in the back of my mind. Beth was loud, charming, always in the spotlight. Homecoming court, varsity soccer, dean's list. Every damn family photo had her front and center. I was always somewhere near the edge of the frame, usually blinking or holding someone else's jacket. When college rolled around, it wasn't even a discussion. Beth got into MIT, early decision, full of swagger and student loans. The whole damn family hosted a barbecue like she'd just been drafted by NASA. I went to community college 3 towns over and didn't even get a card. I didn't mind, not really. I knew early on I'd never win by playing her game, and trying to outshine Beth at her own parade would just get me trampled. So, I started playing a different game altogether. One with longer timelines, one with fewer cheers but higher stakes. Beth majored in something that sounded impressive, computer science with a business minor, and spent summers interning at companies with names you'd recognize. I spent mine freelancing under a fake company name because clients wouldn't take me seriously otherwise. I built websites, fixed busted networks, and taught myself to code like my future depended on it, because frankly, it did. I still remember the summer after her junior year when I called her to ask for help on a problem I was stuck on. I figured, sister to sister, she might throw me a bone. She laughed, not a chuckle, a full-on laugh, like I'd asked her to clean my toilet, told me to Google it like the rest of us. I never forgot that. Not because it hurt, which it did, but because it told me exactly what kind of person she was underneath all that polish. And it told me I'd never ask her for anything again. After that, I got serious. I dropped out of community college. Not because I couldn't hack it, but because I realized I didn't need the degree. I taught myself the rest. I learned by doing, by screwing up, by rebuilding from scratch more times than I can count. I learned to code in 3 languages, launched small tools and apps, flipped a few small projects, and eventually started a company that no one had heard of. But it made money, real money. While Beth was climbing the corporate ladder, I was quietly building my own. Over the years, we drifted like 2 ships in different currents. She'd pop up at family events in overpriced suits, name-dropping her company's latest product. I'd come in jeans, usually late, say as little as possible, and leave early. Nobody knew what I did, and I liked it that way. They assumed I was just coasting. Let them. I didn't need their approval, I needed time, and time was something I'd learned to invest better than any of them. So when Beth's company started spiraling, I saw it before she did. I followed the trends, the layoffs, the bad hires, the bloated structure. I watched their burn rate outpace their growth. And when the board started making noise about restructuring, I made a few phone calls. By then, my company had resources, leverage, and most importantly, no emotional baggage. I didn't target Beth, I targeted inefficiency, opportunity, mismanagement. The fact that she came as part of the package, that was just a little cosmic joke I couldn't help but appreciate. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even victory. It was something else, something quieter. Like finally scratching an itch you've had for 30 years. Not satisfying exactly, but necessary. I could have told my parents right then, could have called Beth, let her know ahead of time, given her a chance to save face. But I didn't, because some truths aren't for sparing. Some truths deserve the slow reveal, especially when the whole damn family's watching. My sister Beth sat there, mouth slightly open, blinking like someone had just hit her with a stun gun right between the eyes, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she had absolutely nothing to say. Grandpa had just torched her in front of everybody, and it was the kind of thing you can't come back from with a quick joke or a smirk. You can't laugh off your baby sister owning the company you just got kicked out of. Not even Beth, queen of the confident shrug and corporate jargon, could polish that turd. I took a slow sip of my wine, just enough to let it linger, just enough to give her space to dig herself deeper, because I knew that's exactly what she was about to do. Dad jumped in, the way a person does when they see a car crash about to happen. He said something about how companies merge all the time these days, about how it's just business, about how maybe we shouldn't talk shop over dinner. His voice was sweet, but his eyes were pleading, darting between us like he could will this whole moment into something less humiliating for his firstborn. Mom didn't say a damn word, which wasn't exactly surprising. She was never much for emotional expression unless it involved the football team losing or a screw-up at work. Beth finally found her voice, though it cracked when she used it. "It's not what you think," she said, trying to pull together some version of her usual arrogant cool. "It's not like I work for her now. It's a merger. 2 equal companies combining forces. Standard strategic move." I didn't even look at her, just cut into my potatoes and let her keep going. "We're consolidating leadership," she continued, trying to sound like a press release. "There's a transition period. Nothing changes overnight." It was funny, watching her lie to herself in real time, like maybe if she said it out loud enough times it would become true. Then she turned to me, like she just remembered I was in the room. "Besides," she said, cocking her head in that way that always used to get her out of trouble, "you wouldn't really understand. You're more of a freelancer, right?" It hung there, that little word, freelancer, like it was a disease or a dirty habit I hadn't been able to quit. And that's when I said it. "Yeah," I told her, my voice even, almost surgical, the kind who signed your severance package last week. It didn't even feel like a punch, it felt like flipping a light switch. 1 second, the room had tension. The next, it was just me holding a mirror up to her and letting her see what the rest of us had known for years. That was the moment Mom stood up. She didn't say anything, just stood slowly, pushing her chair back like it weighed more than it should have, and walked out of the room. No dramatic exit, no angry glare, just silence and footsteps. And that was somehow worse, because if she'd yelled, if she'd shouted, it would have been familiar, expected. But this silence felt final. Like the part in a story where someone closes a door and you know it's not going to open again. Beth sat there, staring after her, mouth twitching like she wanted to explain herself but couldn't find the words. Dad reached for her hand but she pulled away, eyes still locked on the hallway where Mom had disappeared. Grandpa just went back to his carrots, chewing slowly, methodically, as if he'd seen it all before and wasn't surprised by any of it. I didn't move, I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. Because some victories aren't loud. They don't come with tears or applause. They come with silence, with a kind that settles in your chest and makes it hard to breathe, not from sadness, but from the weight of truth finally dropping into place. And as I looked around the table at the people who used to see me as the shadow of the woman sitting across from me, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit until that exact moment. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, not to her, not to Mom, not to any of them. I had already won. It didn't start with a master plan, or some vendetta I'd been carrying like a loaded weapon for the past 20 years. It started like most significant things in my life, in silence and observation. My company, lean and focused, had been steadily growing for the past 5 years. No investors breathing down our necks, no bloated leadership team. Just a handful of people who knew what they were doing and actually cared whether it worked. We weren't flashy. We just built things that worked and made money doing it, month after month, without needing anyone's approval. Beth's company, on the other hand, was the kind that got press for announcing things it hadn't built yet, throwing launch parties for products still in beta, hemorrhaging talent while upper management held yoga retreats. I'd been watching them slowly fall apart from a distance for almost a year. Not because I had it out for them, but because I make it my business to notice inefficiencies. And Beth's company had become a case study in how to ruin something good through arrogance and bloated spending. When I first heard they might be looking to align with a partner, it was from a friend who casually mentioned it over coffee. "You know they're bleeding talent," she said, tapping the side of her mug. "Wouldn't surprise me if they started shopping around." I smiled and nodded, but my brain had already started crunching numbers, pulling threads, laying out a map in the quiet way it always does when I smell blood in the water. I didn't pounce though. I waited, because timing is everything. 3 months later, I got the email. A contact at a shared venture capital firm reached out to feel me out. An informal discussion, he called it, about potential synergies. Translation: they're desperate, and you look stable. I played it cool, even though I already knew what I wanted. I wasn't interested in bailing them out, but I was interested in what they had: engineering talent, some key patents, a customer base that overlapped with ours in all the right ways. I told them we could talk, but it would be on my terms. And quietly. No leaks, no hype, just numbers and structure. What struck me from the start was how nobody mentioned Beth. Not once. She wasn't in the deck, she wasn't on the call, she wasn't even in the background. Which told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. They had already written her off, boxed her into a corner, and now they were trying to clean up the mess without saying the word failure out loud. I almost didn't believe it until the org chart arrived. I was in my office, late on a Thursday, the kind of night when the air feels thick with momentum. The document came through in a password-protected folder with a generic subject line. But when I opened it, there it was, her name, Beth Keller, Director of Product Development, reporting directly to me. I stared at that box for a long time, not smiling, not gloating, just still. It was surreal. I hadn't seen her name in a context where I had authority over it since we were kids, back when I used to manage the score sheets for our backyard basketball games because I wasn't allowed to play unless I kept track of the points. Now, I was keeping score again. Only this time, the game wasn't pretend, and the points were very, very real. I didn't tell anyone. Not my boyfriend, not my CO founder, not even Grandpa. I let it sit in my chest like a stone dropped in a lake, ripples spreading quietly outward. I just wanted the paperwork to go through, the transition to be clean, and the deal to be done before anyone said anything they couldn't take back. She waited until dessert was being cleared to corner me, pulled me aside with a hand on my arm, just firm enough to make a point, and led me out onto the back deck like we were about to have a heart-to-heart instead of a showdown. "What the hell was that?" she hissed, voice sharp and low and full of something that was not quite anger but damn close to panic. "You couldn't just let it go?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw it for the first time. She wasn't mad that I beat her. She was scared because I wasn't playing the game anymore. I'd rewritten the rules, and she didn't even know what page we were on. And the worst part? She still thought it was salvageable, still thought she could talk her way out, still didn't get that it was already done. Final, signed, filed. So I said nothing, just looked out at the yard where we used to play catch, where she used to throw too hard on purpose, where I used to pretend it didn't hurt. And I let the silence do the talking. The back porch creaked under our feet, the way old wood does when it's trying to warn you that what's coming next can't be taken back. Beth was pacing in tight, clipped strides, every movement like a spark from a wire frayed too far. Her hands were clenched into fists, even though she wasn't about to throw one. Not really, not yet. Her face had lost that calm, smug control she wore like a badge of honor. And now it was raw, flushed, jaw tight like she was chewing on glass but couldn't spit it out. "You planned this," she said. Not a question, not even a real accusation, more like a desperate flail toward a version of events that made her less pathetic. "You schemed this whole damn thing. You've been sitting there, waiting for me to fall, just so you could swoop in and play the hero, or the villain. Hell, I don't even know which one you think you are anymore." I just leaned against the railing and watched the backyard. The same square of grass where we used to chase each other around until somebody cried. Usually me. Usually from her pushing just a little too hard and calling it a joke. The same patch of dirt where we buried a time capsule once, convinced our future selves would be legends by now. Beth stepped closer, voice rising. You always hated me for being better, she said, eyes blazing. Smarter, faster, more driven. You never had the guts to play at my level, so you waited until I slipped and kicked me while I was down. Real noble, Aaron. That's when I turned, slowly, calmly, and met her eyes with something she hadn't seen from me in a long, long time. Clarity. Not rage, not pain, not even pride, just the stillness of someone who didn't need her approval anymore. You never outshone me, I said, not raising my voice, not rushing my words. You just talked louder. That landed, not like a punch, but like a truth so simple it couldn't be argued with. Beth flinched, barely. And that's when I saw the shift. Her eyes narrowed, her body coiled, and in one fluid, reflexive motion, she stepped forward and grabbed a fistful of my shirt. Old habits die hard, don't they? It was instinct, pure and stupid and full of history. She'd done that same move 100 times when we were kids, the alpha act, the chest puffing that always got her what she wanted because no one ever called her on it. Not teachers, not our parents, definitely not me. Until now. But I didn't flinch this time. I stood there, still as a stone, letting her feel the difference. Letting her register that the woman she was grabbing wasn't the kid who used to shrink in her shadow. I didn't shove her back. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't need to. We're not kids anymore, Beth, I said quietly, my voice a scalpel. And I don't work for you. For a second, she just stood there, knuckles white, face inches from mine. Then she let go, slowly, fingers trembling like she wanted to hit something but knew it wouldn't help. She took a step back and laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that cracked under the weight of everything she didn't want to admit. You think this makes you the better woman? She asked, voice shaky. You think buying my company makes you worth something now? I never needed to buy your company to be worth something, I said, turning back toward the yard. But apparently I had to buy it to prove that to you. Behind us, through the kitchen window, the light was on. Grandpa stood there, one hand resting on the counter, the other stirring something he probably didn't even plan on serving. But his eyes were fixed on us, sharp as ever, watching like the final judge in a courtroom we hadn't realized we'd entered. He smiled, not a wide grin, just the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, the kind of smile people wear when they see a storm finally breaking, or when a long-awaited truth finally slips out into the open and breathes. Beth didn't see him, or maybe she did, but she couldn't face what his smile meant. She took another step back, shook her head and muttered, "You're not who I thought you were." I didn't reply because what was there to say? She was right, I wasn't. But the truth she'd never seen was that I never wanted to be who she thought I was. I had spent too many years pretending that silence meant weakness, that humility meant submission, that success wasn't real unless someone else confirmed it. But now I knew better. I had already left that version of myself behind. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she was really angry. Because, for the first time in her life, she couldn't reach me, couldn't rattle me, couldn't win. And I didn't need to say a single word more to make that clear. That's when Grandpa walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just entered like he always did, slow but steady, slippers brushing the tile, bathrobe rustling softly, eyes clear and focused despite the hour. He moved to the stove, checked the pot he'd long since turned off, stirred it once with a wooden spoon like the act itself helped him think. For a moment, we just existed in that space together, both of us saying nothing but somehow speaking volumes. Then he turned to me, that familiar gaze as sharp as it had been at dinner, and nodded toward the back hallway that led to the den. "Come on," he said, not as a request but as a statement of inevitability. So I followed him down the hall, past the creaky floorboard near the bathroom, into the small wood-paneled room where he'd kept his little treasures for decades. He sat down slowly in his old recliner, motioned for me to take the chair across from him, and reached into the drawer of the side table without looking. His hand came out holding something wrapped in a piece of cloth, aged and worn. He unwrapped it gently, and there it was, Grandma's watch. Everyone in the family had assumed it would go to Beth. Of course they did, the firstborn, the woman of action. But he didn't hand it to her. He handed it to me. "I've had this tucked away for years," he said, placing it in my open hand like he was transferring a responsibility more than a possession. Your grandmother told me to give it to the one who reminded her most of herself, not the loudest, not the most praised, the one who stayed quiet and kept going. I stared down at the watch, the way the scratched glass caught the light, the way the leather band had molded to Grandma's wrist and now seemed ready to take on mine. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't have questions, but because I knew this wasn't a moment for questions. It was a moment for receiving. She needs attention, he said after a beat, eyes not leaving mine. Always did, since she was a girl. She's not bad, just hollow in ways she doesn't understand yet. But you never needed the applause, you just needed time. The door creaked behind us and we both turned. Mom stood there, silent as always, holding a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold. Her eyes dropped to the watch in my hand and for a moment there was no expression at all. But then something shifted, just barely, a tightening around the eyes, a softening of the jaw. Not approval exactly, not forgiveness, just recognition. She didn't speak, just nodded once and turned away, footsteps echoing down the hall with the weight of a woman, who maybe wished she'd seen things a little sooner. I looked at Grandpa again. He was watching her disappear, then turned back to me. Some things can't be bought, he said, slow and certain, but some people, oh, they're for sale all right. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes and exhaled like a man who had just finished the last chapter of a story only he ever truly understood. And I sat there, with that watch in my hand, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this one. Not angry, not triumphant, just still. And somehow, that was enough. When I walked into the office on Monday, Beth's name was gone from the system by 9:30. No internal memo, no all-hands meeting, just gone. By noon, my inbox was lighting up with messages from employees who had waited for this moment. One engineer said Beth had taken credit for his work 3 quarters in a row. Another described being screamed at during a Zoom call for asking about project timelines. I read each one, and for every line I scanned, I felt something unfamiliar begin to stir in me. Not pride, not vindication, a kind of responsibility maybe. That afternoon, Dad called. He was already crying. He asked why I hadn't told him, asked how long I'd known. Asked what happened to the little girls who used to play with Legos on the living room floor. Why didn't you say something sooner? He asked, voice trembling. Because I wanted a sister, I said, not rival. After the call ended, I sat in my office, alone, lights dimmed, door closed, thinking about Beth, not the executive, not the loudmouth, but the girl with the scraped knees and the crooked grin who used to laugh too loud. And I wondered if she'd ever forgive me, or if she'd ever forgive herself. On the kitchen counter was an envelope, heavy, not physically but in a way that felt old and waiting. No name on the front, no return address, just one word in Mom's handwriting, sharp and familiar and unmistakable, Aaron. I didn't open it. Not yet. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I didn't want to know what was inside, because the not knowing still held possibilities. Thanksgiving came around, like it always does. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe because fewer voices were filling it, or maybe because silence tends to make the walls feel closer. Beth wasn't there. Her name wasn't brought up, but she was everywhere, in the gaps, the empty seat, the untouched place setting that Dad laid out anyway. It wasn't hostility, it was more like grief, but without the clarity of death to make sense of it. After the dishes were cleared, I slipped away to the den. I sat down at his desk. Same place I'd sat months earlier when he gave me Grandma's watch, and this time, I pulled out the envelope that had waited patiently in my desk drawer ever since Mom left it for me. I opened it. There was only one line, "You were always enough." I just didn't know how to say it. I read it once, then again, and then I sat back in the chair, eyes stinging in a way I hadn't felt in years. The tears came slow, not dramatic, just real. The kind of cry that leaks out of you when you've held too much for too long, and finally something cracks in just the right way. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at Beth, not at the years I'd spent chasing a version of success I thought I needed to prove something. Because maybe I had needed to prove it. Maybe that's what it took to realize I didn't. Grandpa looked at me one last time before I left and said simply, "Good. Now keep going." As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I realized the real inheritance wasn't the watch or the letter or the nod from my mother. It was the knowledge that I had survived the story they wrote for me, and I had rewritten it without anyone's permission. Maybe I won, or maybe I lost something bigger trying to prove I didn't need to. But one thing's for sure, some dinners change everything, and some silences say more than applause ever could. So, what would you have done? Would you have said something at that dinner, or just let her believe the lie?